I want to introduce Gene Moran, president of Capital Integration. They are a platinum sponsor, and he has a presentation to give to you. Gene, thank you so much for being with us again.
Test, test, test. Nothing.
Test. How about that?
There you go.
I think it works. You tell me when.
Whenever you're ready, Bob.
Okay, let's change the energy. How many remember the movie Jerry Maguire? Come on, we all remember the movie. What's the most famous line in the movie? That was weak. Cuba Gooding Jr., when he was yelling at Tom Cruise, he said, "I can't hear you," one more time. Still kind of weak. Let's not forget why we're here. We're in business. We're looking for business, and we're trying to connect to business. And we should embrace that. And I think it's important that we remember that. Yes, we want to serve a government customer. We want to solve their needs, but we're also in business. So let's figure out how to find the money. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways here. I help companies accelerate federal sales by 12 to 18 months, such that they garner $5 million to up to $500 million in upside sales in a single year, 12 to 18 months faster than they otherwise might have. I've been in government relations for over 20 years. I've been an independent consultant and lobbyist for over 10 years. In the last 10 years, my clients have seen upside sales in excess of $5 billion. That's a big claim. We're talking about big numbers today. Let me show you some examples. Arnold Magnetic Technologies. They make high-end magnets. Lindy just talked to us about copper. Well, high-end magnets use things called rare earths, things like neodymium, samarium, cobalt. They only come from China. This is the rendering of the Columbia-class submarine, our highest national strategic priority program. Congress declared by law that we could no longer take rare earth material from China in our supply chains. They just dropped the boom. Arnold, 4 layers down in the supply chain, recognized, wow, we have a big problem here. This is going to mean a delay because we don't have another qualified supply chain to get these critical rare earth materials. For those that don't know, further to Lindy's point, we are years from having a secure supply chain onshore for some of these materials. Well, Arnold couldn't communicate directly with the government customer. That's not allowed. The CEO rolled the dice, and he decided he was going to bring this issue up as a national security issue. So we spoke with OSD, spoke to the White House, spoke to Congress, and got a change made to that law to allow a little bit of breathing room so that more supply chain, a second supply chain could be developed. What could have been a delay for a national security program, and certainly a delay in funding to Arnold, was changed. We did that through effective communications. Went the wrong way. Austral USA, they make ships. This is the Littoral Combat Ship, a pretty unusual looking ship. This program got off to a very shaky start several years back. They actually started to build the ship before the design was complete. Any engineers in the room? Any do-it-yourselfers in the room? Would you start a big project like this without having a complete design? Well, they did, but they didn't do this alone. They had some help. The Navy was on board, Congress was on board, and industry was on board. Well, it wasn't long before the ship began delivering with problems. The uninformed referred to it as the little crappy ship, LCS. Not something you want your product to be named. Well, there was a lot of finger pointing about where the blame really belonged, and it was a shared blame. There were a lot of decisions made that people probably would not have made a second time if given the chance. But we had to get the correct information on the table. Congress wanted to kill this program, which would have been terrible for the Navy, but also bad for industry. We had to get correct information in front of the right decision makers across industry, into Congress, and across the government customer. The Navy had to accept a little bit of responsibility here. Congress had to give a little bit of breathing room. Today, there are 32 ships in the fleet, including some steaming in the South China Sea today. This program could have been killed early. Austal was able to power through it. Through some of the learning that took place, they were able to wring out 1 million man-hours in the cost of this ship. Think about that in terms of a program cost. They took $100 million out of the cost of the program. This is not my son, but it's one of my favorite CEOs. This is Matt Zimmerman, CEO of Beast Code. Beast Code makes digital visualization tools. Digital twins is one example of visualization tools. They're very skilled at taking 2D documentation and turning it into 3D presentations. Matt started Beast Code when he was about 25 years old. At the time, in his words, they were 7 dudes with a good idea. Well, today he's 32, but 7 years ago, the way he broke in was with the Zumwalt class DDG 1000. To get this ship out of the yards, the Navy hadn't quite figured out how to improve upon the training in so many of the new systems that were on board. Beast Code came along and figured out how to do training in a tablet-based format such that sailors wouldn't need to go to bricks and mortar type training. They radically reduced the cost of training and produced a much more highly effective form of training. Training is just one capability that the digital visualization tools can provide. The Navy quickly embraced it, and now Beast Code has products. Just a few years later, they are in every single Navy ship, and they are in Air Force programs as well. Axis Communication, they make video surveillance equipment, as you can see here. A couple of years ago, Congress came out and said, anybody that has products that come from a company called Huawei can no longer sell to the federal government. Well, Axis didn't have any components that came from Huawei, but they were incorrectly identified on a list that was promulgated across the Department of Defense that said you can't buy from these companies because they do business with Huawei. We had to get that corrected because there was $100 million worth of business at stake. That meant communicating with senior leaders in OSD. We had to communicate with Congress. We had to demonstrate that our supply chain was secure, that we were incorrectly identified. And we got that list repromulgated such that we could restore that $100 million in business. Each of these company successes is about being able to effectively communicate at the right place, at the right time, with the right people, and most importantly, with the right message. I guide companies in how to do this, and I teach companies how to do this. How many of you have ever seen a lobbyist in the wild before today? This is me at the annual lobbyist convention. Here I am at another lobbying party. I almost had you. You thought this was true, right? No, there's no lobbyist convention. There's no lobbyist party like that. This is actually the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show. How many lobbyists do you think there are at the federal level? Any guesses? I'm hearing 10, I'm hearing 50. The actual number at the federal level is 12,000, but that's across all aspects of your life. So think about pharmaceuticals, healthcare, agriculture, financial services, defense, Chamber of Commerce, AARP. Any card holders in the room? Come on. How do they know when to send you that card? Yeah, across all of those aspects of your life, there are 12,000 federal lobbyists. In defense, there are only a couple of hundred. So contrary to what you may have heard in the media, they're not everywhere, and they're not the ones that are making all the decisions. In fact, they're very few in number. It's an easy target. And I hope to dispel a few myths for you here. I help companies that are working across what I call the three-ring circus of federal sales. This is not a pejorative term. identify the three rings as industry, agency, and Congress. If you are in a big top of a circus, the higher up you go in that tent, the more you can see the things that are in relative motion. That's what's happening in federal sales. Things in relative motion across these three rings and across multiple fiscal years. Your customer is a constellation of people across those three rings. There are many people involved in decisions. Very few are actual decision makers. So there are deciders, there are influencers, there are enablers, and frankly, there are people that don't matter. But you need to be able to figure out who's who and which ones do matter and where and when do you need to communicate with them. Most companies are missing the ability to synthesize this information and show up at the right place and time. We're here at a contracting summit. You're probably here because you want access to contracts. It's probably your understanding that contracts are the most accessible part of the process. And in some ways they are, and it appears that way because they're so public. We have RFIs and RFPs. We announce how things are going to be done. We identify there are billions of dollars available at particular states or regions or programs. But the reality is that this is about following funding of your federal sale. And if you're showing up at the time of the contract, you are way late. Some in the room understand this, but most don't know the rest of the process. And it's worth your time to learn these other parts of the process: budgeting, legislation, acquisition, and then contracting. The budget development takes a couple of years. You actually can participate in that. You see the dollar sign up there at the top? It moves over to Congress. Congress legislates. They mark up the proposed budget. They approve every single federal dollar that gets spent. That's ultimately going to be on your contract. The acquisition phase then identifies, okay, we've agreed that we're going to spend a certain amount of money on a particular capability. What can the market really produce? So a competition is developed. And then we move on to what type of contract will it be? Connecting to the right people, right place, right time with the right message is critical. And it's all about following this funding. Your competitors understand how to participate in these other three parts of the process. I help companies do that. How many of you know what GOVT is? How many took a shower last night or this morning? Come on. Nobody? We have a problem. Okay, grout is that stuff that holds tile together, right? I lived in base housing a while back. I was active duty Navy. We had grout that was failing in our master bathroom. My wife and I have 4 daughters. You cannot be without a shower or one of the bathrooms in a house of 4 daughters. It just can't be. I thought to myself, I can fix this. I go to the hardware store. I go to get grout. The guy at the store says, you're going to need a grout float to apply that. And I sort of knew what a grout float was, and he showed me it's this hard piece of rubber with a handle on it, and you smear the grout around. I said, you know, I'm only going to do this once. I've got a wallpaper sponge, one of those big wallpaper sponges. I'll just use that to spread it. The guy looks at me and said, okay. So I go home and I spread the grout, let it dry overnight, turn the shower on the next day. What happens? Grout fails. Do that a couple of more times. I'm now 4 to 5 days into this, and we still don't have a master bathroom shower. Finally, the handyman comes in. What does he use? A grout float, a $15 tool. And he shows me how when you spread that grout in a very specific way across the seams of the tile, it compresses that grout down in between the tiles such that there's no way that water will penetrate. No matter how hard you press with a sponge, you will never get it as tight as a grout float can get it. It was a learning point for me, the difference between an investment and an expense. That $15 investment could have saved me certainly time, but a lot of humiliation as well. I can't work with every company, and not every company can work with me. But I have come to recognize several things about the process over my 20 years working on this, that people need to have a way to access the information. I developed a program here called Capital Currency, which is meant to show you how to work your way through these 3 rings of the circus of federal sales, how to work through the 4 phases, how to work through the customer constellation and break it down so that you can understand who really matters and who you need to speak with. As part of my working with the Defense Leadership Forum over time, I've reduced the rate on this for today only, cut it in half by over 50%. So at midnight tonight, this particular deal goes away. But it's the only course of its kind that presents material in a very digestible format. Short videos, long videos, a book, templates. If you're trying to brush up before you go into a meeting, you can learn how to do it. If you want to go from start to finish, you can, but you don't have to sit down and start the course and then work your way to a graduate degree. It's meant to be touch and go, easily digestible. I dominate my space in government relations. I'm not shy about saying that because I understand how this process works from multiple perspectives, and I've seen a lot of different companies participate in the process. Some surprise you. The 4 examples at the top were meant to show you that companies of all sizes, small, medium, and large, are up against the exact same process. It doesn't matter what you're selling. It could be staplers, it could be the Columbia-class submarine. The same process is in play, and the same ability to communicate effectively across those 3 rings is what this is all about. I have so many tools of influence that I use throughout the process. I've only got 15 minutes here. I can't crunch 20 years of experience down into 15 minutes. But I want to show you just one example of a tool that I use that I think you can use in any setting. This is what I call my 8-minute rule of messaging. You typically get a government customer meeting that might be 20 or 30 minutes of time block on a calendar. You don't want to use all that time. You want to go in there with a very tight message that can be told in 8 minutes. Here's how you do it. Once you've got the meeting, you're going to walk in. You might see something on the shelf that catches your interest, something about their family. You might acknowledge that, but you want to get right to the meat and talk about 4 things: the issue, the background, the discussion, and the recommendation. The issue, what's the problem? The background, how did we get here? The discussion, why does your solution make more sense than anything else out there? The recommendation, you need a specific amount of money put in a specific place in the budget to support a specific program's capability that you are uniquely qualified to serve. When you can convey your message that tightly, you become a winner. Why are you a winner? Because you're going to do something for that government customer that nobody else ever does. You're going to give them time back. When you give them time back in their calendar, you earn respect. You stop giving away credibility needlessly by going on and telling them everything that you know as opposed to everything they need to know. You can serve your customer well such that you become a resource to them. That customer recognizes you instantly as somebody who understands what they're doing and understands the process. They'll reach out to you for advice. I've just touched on a few highlights here. As I said, I can't possibly convey everything that I know. Too many people leave tools of influence on the table that they don't need to leave on the table. They fail to recognize the difference between an investment and an expense. I'll be at a table right inside the front door next door. I'm happy to speak with anybody about your situation. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.